why medieval knights went completely insane. Let's get into this.
It's probably not news to anybody that fighting in incredibly brutal hand to hand combat for hours at a time, crushing guys' heads with maces, seeing your homies get impaled or beheaded, and then just kind of sitting there to deal with it in the aftermath probably had some seriously damaging long term psychological effects. But it
No
might
cap.
actually be
No
worse than we can
cap.
even imagine, especially because the medieval mind was, of course, anatomically the same as ours, but spiritually it was way different. PTSD as a clinical diagnosis didn't exist until 1980, and it was essentially invented to describe what was happening to Vietnam veterans. To sum it up super simply, PTSD is a fear disorder with flashbacks and hypervigilance. It's basically like your central nervous system is stuck in the on position at all times. When you look through the medieval sources, you don't always find that kind of thing, and I think applying modern terms to the medieval past can sometimes be a stretch, which is a hilariously ironic thing for me to say, but anyway. What we can find in the medieval sources is something even deeper. There was an 11th century French warrior named Rigaud who had gotten pretty seriously injured in a battle. He somehow survived, but his right arm was totally paralyzed, and there wasn't really a lot the medieval doctors could do for that kind of thing. Rigaud ended up falling into a deep depression when he got home, and according to a contemporary chronicle, he wanted to die rather than drag out a disgusting and useless life with his body in such a shameful state. The injury
Damn.
obviously had forced him to give up his life as a soldier, but in medieval society, that was his role. He was one of those who fought, and now he was nothing. If you keep on reading the chronicle, Rigaud just keeps going deeper and deeper.
No, when he's talking about how he doesn't see himself as valuable now, he can't do what he was doing. Basically, he lost his job. I find it kind of weird that this same thing still exists today. Like some people, like when they lose their jobs, they feel like they lose their purpose and go in this kind of depressive episode where they view themselves as pointless. It's kind of interesting to see it happen to people back then. Especially, you would assume like, yo, you get to rest, gang. Like you have no fear of being mutilated in battle. You know what I'm saying? You're not gonna suffer from any more pain. I guess the only pain he was suffering from, maybe the pain from his arm or something. But it's so crazy. Like that same shit from back then is still happening today. Even like when people retire, I don't know if you guys have heard like some people, some of your parents, not your parents, but some people's parents, when they retire, they go into a kind of depressive zone because they feel like they have no purpose anymore. They have no hobbies. They have nothing. Their work was their entire life. So I guess this guy's work was his entire life, and he doesn't know what to do after.
Into this downward spiral and even stops doing the things that used to make him happy, like riding horses. For a red blooded, testosterone filled medieval man to not want to zoom around on a steed, something had to be seriously wrong. We can look at another example from the 11th century, which is recorded in a Viking saga called the Grettis. There was a Viking warrior named Onund, and he lost his lower leg in a brutal battle in the late 9th century. Maybe you can already see where this is going. When he gets home, he's fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg, and in typical medieval fashion, everybody starts calling him Onund Treeleg, which in terms of medieval nicknames is actually much better than Notker the Stammerer or Louis the Fat. Eventually his leg healed up as much as it could and he could walk around with the prosthetic, but mentally he was never the same. Someone asked him why he was so down all the time, and Onund replied, "In eyes of fighting man and fame, my strength and manhood are but vain. This is the thing that makes me a joyless man." If you've ever seen PTSD portrayed in movies or TV shows, it's always something like a veteran coming back from war, and he takes his family out to the fair or something, and then like a car backfires in the parking lot, and all of a sudden he's back in Fallujah again. But that's not what we're seeing here. These medieval men have their identities completely tied up, not only in their combat abilities, but also in their ability to physically contribute to the community. Once
Like it's like I said earlier, their job was their entire life. So losing that shit, they just lost themselves, a big part of themselves. That's why they like this.
That's gone, it's like they're just a burden and they become these ghosts. Now, all of this isn't to
It's
say
probably
that
much
PTSD
worse
didn't exist in the
back
Middle
then.
Ages, and if you've ever clicked an article or watched a YouTube video about medieval PTSD, they're probably talking about cases like Sir Peter Bayarn, who the French chronicler Jean Froissart mentions in his retelling of the Hundred Years' War. Peter doesn't have any physical injuries from all the combat experiences he's lived through, but from what Froissart tells us, Peter is clearly pretty mentally damaged. When he gets home from the war, his marriage breaks down, his wife leaves him and of course takes the kids. He starts having these lucid nightmares and he develops this fear of sleeping alone. Froissart specifically notes, Sir Peter has a habit when he is asleep at night of getting up and arming himself. He draws his sword and fights, but he does not know with whom. So we've got guys like Peter who don't have any physical injuries, but they're mentally scarred. Then we've got guys like Onan Treeleg, whose physical injuries are also causing some kind of emotional injury that forces them into this downward spiral. There was an understanding in medieval medical theory that traumatic injuries could lead to long-term depression, and an English friar aptly named Bartholomeus Anglicus actually wrote a lot about depression and had a shockingly modern understanding of it. He wasn't examining mental health for soldiers specifically, but when he talks about treatment options, he recommends having the person taken out of their stressful environment, giving them comfort and encouragement and music therapy, along with these small, easy tasks to keep the mind occupied while they get back on.
Damn, bro. You know when I read certain like articles saying like a lot of things have already been figured out back then, and then we're just being retold the same thing over and over again. Some of these people had the answers. It's just that the language is kind of hard to understand. It's English, but it's what's the word? Is it Archi? It's Archi something. Like it's very hard English for like a modern person to understand what they're saying or what they're talking about. But damn,
I know I'm beating a dead
had this
horse in
shit
my
figured
videos
out.
at this point, but the popular conception of the Middle Ages is that it was 1,000 years of savage darkness and backwardness, but here's a 13th century friar.
Also, if I was that nigga who I'm saying got my arm cut off or whatever, and I got to go home, I know I say this in a modern stance, right? I can't imagine myself back then. I can't see why they got so depressive because they lost essentially their jobs or what they see as their life purpose. But you bet your ass I'm not going back on that battlefield. I am not going back on that battlefield, bro. Not gonna lie, I'm not fighting a sword. Y'all ever been stabbed before? That's one of my biggest fears. I'm not trying to get stabbed. I'm not trying to get stabbed, bro. I'm not trying to get stabbed. Oh my gosh. And one of the things next to my biggest fear is being stabbed with a dirty knife, bro. It's like my biggest fear is being stabbed. Now the knife is dirty, bro. Like it's just too much, bro. Like I wouldn't want to go back. I wouldn't want to go back, bro. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I wouldn't even know if I'll be fighting.
Recommending essentially the same treatment that a modern psychiatrist would. I think this is because medieval physicians understood
Lobotomy.
that they were actually treating something that we've only recently come to rediscover in the 21st century, which is the concept of moral injury. PTSD is tied to fear and an overactive nervous system, but moral injury is usually more associated with guilt, shame, regret, betrayal, a loss of meaning, or
I wonder how much of this moral injury is from the self and how much of it's from what other people are saying. You know how they say like some of the self-hate that we basically say to ourselves is not always ourselves. Like somebody had to tell you that and then it became your voice. So I wonder how much of that moral injury is societal pressure versus how much of it is it like individual pressure? It has to be like they think their community perceives them as useless or something like that.
identity. So someone with PTSD might constantly be thinking, I'm not safe, but a person with a moral injury might be thinking, I'm not a good person, or the world isn't the way I thought it was. Also, if you've ever watched any of my videos, you know that medieval people had a very specific conception of how the world worked and what their individual place was in it. And it was a much more concrete conception than what we have now. So
Tell
that's
us
really
now.
important to
Tell us
understand
now.
and remember. If
We're not
this
gonna go
conception
back.
got
Tell us
shattered, the
now.
consequences could be totally disastrous. The term moral injury was actually coined by the psychiatrist Jonathan Shea in his book Achilles in Vietnam, which I highly recommend if the topic of this video interests you. Although it focuses more on mental trauma in the classical world, it's still very relevant. Shea says that veterans can usually recover from horror, fear, and grief once they get home and they start reintegrating into civilian life, provided that what they think of as right hasn't also been violated. So basically, you can survive the terrors of war, but what leaves the real lasting damage is when you survive doing something or watching something be done that violates everything you believe about how the world is supposed to work.
Do you think some of them are going through that now? Like, look at like all the Vietnam veterans, right? Look at what they fought for. Look at, how much effort they put in to basically gift us piece of the world that we have now. Not even Vietnam veterans. I don't know why I said Vietnam veterans. Because of the book I saw that he showed us. I'm talking about like World War II soldiers and all of that. Like they generally fought Nazis, they did this, they did that. And if some of them are alive, I'm pretty sure some of them are alive. You think this is what's happening to them? And now they're just watching it crumble. They're watching their whole world kind of crumble because everything they fought for is now being unraveled. Now, are they questioning? Were they fighting for the good guys? Which they were. Like fighting Nazis, you were fighting, say for the good guys. You were fighting for the good of the world. And now they're just seeing them take over again. Like, what was the point? What was all that bloodshed? What was all that loss? What was the point? Interesting thought.
So just think about a knight going on crusade who exists in this moral framework of the church and the code of chivalry and the feudal bond and the whole concept that this war he's fighting in has been blessed by God. I have to stress that these guys were really fighting for something they believed in. And I have to stress again that everything was so specific in the medieval mind. The system they lived in told them exactly what they were fighting for, what the rules were, what it meant to violate those rules, etc., etc. So when that whole system broke down, my question is, does that knight's whole idea of reality break down with it? Well,
I feel
thank the
like
good
it
Lord
does.
above, we have a
I feel like
perfect
it does.
contemporary chronicler to answer this exact question, and his name was Jean de Joinville. Jean wasn't a career soldier, he was a regional lord and really more of an administrator than a fighter, which I actually think makes his account even more interesting to us. In 1244, the French king Louis IX, who would later become Saint Louis, started organizing the Seventh Crusade. At this point, the Crusades still loomed really large in the European imagination, even though the returns had been diminishing for quite a while, and Jean joined up partly out of a sense of feudal duty and also because his father had gone on crusade 35 years before against the Albigensians. Long story short, the Seventh Crusade was a complete disaster in pretty much every sense of the word. The basic strategy was to cross the Mediterranean, invade Egypt, and then take the
Holy
army
fucking
and
shit. Holy shit. Like you had to be expecting some people to die, right? Yeah, looking at this, you had to expect some people to die from this entire thing.
up into the Holy Land from the south. It didn't work out that way at all. The army pretty much immediately got cut off from its supply lines. Tons of soldiers died from dysentery or scurvy. And
Yeah, bro. Like I was not expecting anything good from that travel plan, for a lack of better words. I was not expecting anything good to
whoever could
happen.
still fight was crushed by the Mamluks at the Battle of Al-Mansura in 1250. Jean's account of the
I
battle is
wonder
actually
why they didn't go on land rather. Or would it have been too obvious to see? Is that why they went via the sea? I didn't mean to rhyme. I wonder why. Like why?
incredible, and forgive me for getting hyped up about this, but this is the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. All I want to do is to reach across the centuries and put myself in the shoes of someone 800 years ago. What did it smell
Why? Why? Why do you want that? I would not want, despite how bad, despite how bad the world is right now, I would not want to be in any other time period. You know what it means for a black person to say, if I say, oh yeah, I want to be in the 70s, I want to be in the 60s. Nigga, what am I doing there? What am I doing there? Why? Why? Do you know what they would do to me? Listen, gang, yo, do you know what they will do to me? It's not jokes, fam. It's not jokes. Why do you want to be back there, bro?
Like and taste like. Give me the texture. I love this because Jean doesn't describe the battle as this sequence of heroic actions, which is what you would get in epic poetry from the Middle Ages. He narrates it as this mishmash of these close calls and then this general insanity and chaos, but then a few moments that stick
All
with
these
his
people were
brain.
living
He
on
says,
the
"Well,
edge,
I
I'm
was
not
on
gonna
foot with my
lie.
knights, wounded, as I have already told you. Up came the king with his own division. There was a great shouting and a tremendous noise of trumpets and kettle drums. He halted on a raised roadway. Never have I seen so fine a man in arms. He towered head and shoulders over his people, a gilded helmet on his head, and in his hand a sword of German steel. When he had halted there, the good knights of his household hurled themselves into the midst of the Turks. You must know that this was a great feat of arms, for there was no shooting of arrows nor bolts. On both sides, it was a fight with mace and sword." Let's just take a second to talk about what's happening psychologically here. So Jean is wounded, he's on foot, he's surrounded by chaos, and the detail that burns itself into his memory is the image of the king. This is actually how traumatized memory tends to work. Everything is this crazy blur, and then one or two images crystallize.
I find it so difficult to picture myself like in these type of battles. Now take all the modern anxiousness that people have and imagine yourself in this shit, bro. I'm not doing this shit, bro. I'm not, bro. I'm not. And then they talk about we gotta go to war. Like, gang, how am I gonna shoot an enemy when I'm overthinking where my bullet is gonna go? I'm overthinking where my bullet's gotta go, gang. Like, nah, bro. What if I reload? Yeah, what if I remember I had a dream where I was reloading my gun. I'm at war. Like, this is like war. Like, we in trenches fighting. I'm shooting, right? I reload my gun and all my bullets just fell out of the what's the thing? The fucking ammo thing, bro. I don't know what that shit is. I don't do guns like that. Everything fell out. And it was money and shit. And I just gave up, bro. I just said, hey, bro, I'm done, bro. I just said, I'm done, bro. I don't want to do this shit, bro. Like, yo, if you want to kill me, bro, just kill me, guys. Just do it quickly, though. I remember I just sat in the trench. I said, yo, bro, I'ma just help out. You know, if a nigga needs a magazine, yeah, it's called a magazine. If a nigga needs a magazine, I'll hand it to them, bro. I'm not doing this shit, bro. Yo, one of the dumbest dreams I've
It's
ever
like the
had,
brain
bro.
has to cling to something stable when everything else is falling apart. Somehow, miraculously, Jean survived all of this and managed to get back to France in one piece, although presumably he was pretty shaken from the whole experience. 20 years later, King Louis tried to get the boys back together for another crusade, and shockingly, a lot of people said yes, even though the last one had been a complete catastrophe. But Jean put his foot down and said no. He had gone on the Seventh Crusade with this enthusiasm and this idea that God had willed it and they were going to capture the Holy Land from the godless heathens. But then the actual reality was that the whole thing was kind of pointless, and the flower
Nigga
of the
starved
French
for no
nobility,
reason.
along with the rest of the army, pooped themselves to death or had their flesh rot off from gangrene before they even got to fight the enemy.
You probably could have worded it better. You could have said, like, yo, not gonna lie, the previous plan was kinda ass. The previous plan was kinda ass. Y'all niggas had us on boats. Niggas were dying from shitting themselves everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Everything was just bad. The planning, nah, y'all niggas didn't have the correct plan. I don't want to be a part of this. I'm out, gang. If that was me on that boat, I feel like I could put myself in any situation that happened back then and say I'm not participating in that shit. But you know, we don't have the indoctrination. It is kind of a form of indoctrination that they had. So I'm speaking with my free mind right now. Speaking with, you know, a person who has had freedom since birth and no indoctrination and access to like global education. You know what I mean? I'm speaking as a free man. So but I don't have that type of indoctrination. But like, yeah, you gotta at some point. If I see my niggas dying, I gotta be like, mm-mm, not me, not me. Probably back then you'd want to get vengeance for your
Now, it's
homies.
important to mention here that Jean is writing all this, or actually dictating it, about 50 years after the events he's describing. So he's an old man at this point, looking back at his life. When you read his account,
He's
you can
been
tell he's trying to
pondering.
recreate
He's
this
been
world with a
pondering.
holy crusading king that no longer existed in the France he lived in. But at this point, King Louis is dead, his fellow veterans are dead, the Crusades were all a failure, and Jean is sitting there thinking the same thing that a lot of American veterans have found themselves thinking in the past few decades. What were we even doing there? What was the point of all this suffering?
Why?
We'll
Why
never
did we
know if he had
fight?
any symptoms of PTSD, but we
Yo, one of the saddest things recently learned, as you know, like in these times, you, I don't want to say what actually happened, but just so you know, I was speaking with some army people, and I was saying I'm not going, but if I got to, just know your boy's getting pulled. Your boy's getting pulled, right? Is that you kind of have to hope that what you're being told is the correct shit. That shit, I was like, fuck. Fuck. You gotta hope that what they're telling you is the correct shit. You gotta hope that you are on the right side of history. I was like, God damn. God damn. And then I was like, yo, man, I gotta have a notepad, bro. I gotta have a notepad. I'm gonna have on me and write whatever they're telling me. And then, like, if I unfortunately die in the war, like, let my notepad live on. And then it say, these bitch ass niggas lied. They fucking lied, nigga. They told us this, and this. Tell the people, tell the world. Tell the world if it was the truth or lies. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You never know. Once you become an army, a marine, or navy, you never know if you're on the right side of history until after the fact. Until after the fact. Isn't that fucking crazy?
Injured soul, and that his entire worldview was crushed by this event he lived through in his early 20s. But like I said before, Jean wasn't a career soldier. He kind of just tagged along in the crusade out of a sense of Christian feudal duty to his holy king. I want to look at like a career soldier. What about the guys who did this kind of thing constantly? What kind of psychological effect did it have on them? Well, there's a really convenient narrative connection for me here because Jean de Joinville's grandson, Geoffroy de Charny, is exactly the guy we're looking for. He grew up hearing his grandfather's stories.
That's a
about
nice name,
Crusades,
actually,
He ended up
Geoffroy.
going to war himself,
That's a nice
and then he
name.
basically came up with this whole philosophical system to try and make sense of all the suffering. Geoffroy was the third son in his family, which in the Middle Ages meant he inherited absolutely nothing. That really sucked, but what's cool for us is that it meant he had to become a tournament fighter and earn money and honor by messing people up.
They give you
Eventually,
nothing?
he graduated to
Nothing.
warfare during the Hundred Years'
Damn.
War and
Niggas
got
don't even
captured and
support.
ransomed by the English twice. There's
No
also this
allowance?
story about Geoffroy where he apparently once tracked down a man who had betrayed him, dragged him out of bed, decapitated him, and
Holy John Wick, chill. Chill, Crody. Why so much violence, Crody? There's no. Yo, you guys can't see it. Let me show y'all, bro. Let me show you this nigga's reaction, bro. Let me show you. Yo, this is a nigga who wants to. Yo, this is a nigga who wants to. Yo, he is serious about what he's doing. I don't know if you know. Saying what is his name? Geoffroy. I don't know if this is Geoffroy, but yeah, this guy, he is serious about what he's doing. No emotion, no nothing. Chill, John Wick. Chill, bruh. No need for such violence, Cody. No need for such violence, Cody. Chill,
body
fam.
parts on the town gates. Eventually, he was appointed the job of bearer of the Oriflamme, which was the sacred battle standard of France. This was a ridiculously dangerous job because you're the guy holding this incredibly important ceremonial flag, which means everyone on the other side is going to notice you and try to kill you immediately so they can steal the flag, because that type of thing was huge for medieval battlefield morale. He actually did end up dying at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356 with the flag.
Yo, bro, this is a tough image. I'm not gonna lie. Yo, I was gonna let the video play out, but this is fucking tough. Not gonna lie, this is tough from an aesthetic point of view. To be there, fuck no. But to see Not to watch. I wouldn't even watch people fight to their death. Like,
still in
what do
his
you take me
hand,
for?
surrounded by 5
Crazy?
English soldiers who he had apparently taken with him. Geoffroy was,
It's
of
not something
course,
we
very
do,
much
Crudy.
respected by every dude in the realm, and sometime before his heroic death at Poitiers, he actually wrote a book called The Book of Chivalry, which for about a century afterwards was
Geoffroy.
basically the operating manual for French knighthood. What's interesting about the book is that Geoffroy is pretty blunt about the reality of war. It's not like some flowery ode to fighting or whatever. He talks about the hunger and the thirst and the sleepless nights, battling for days at a time, watching your friends die. The point of mentioning all this stuff is because he wants the reader, who's presumably a young knight, to know what's
To know
coming.
the
There's
truth.
this part where
Shout out Geoffroy. That right there, that's a bro nigga. That's a bro nigga right there. He's seen through this shit and said, I gotta tell the future generation, I'm not gonna be a hoe. That's a real
talks
nigga right
about a
there. I
certain
fuck
point
with
in a
Geoffroy.
military campaign where you feel
No,
like,
besides
and
the
I
part
quote,
of
even
killing the
nature is
guy
going
who
against me.
betrayed him.
If you look at the context,
But they're
it
all
seems like he's
killers.
doing his
Yo,
best.
is that not fucking crazy? Back then, a lot of people were just killers. Like, it wasn't like, oh, you were a murderer. Like, no, like, nigga, a lot of people back then were killers. Is that not fucking crazy to think about? Yo, that's crazy.
To describe this sensation of your own body becoming alien to you, something that we would label today as disassociation. Of course, his solution to this is to push through it, but the fact that he even acknowledges it in a 14th century book is actually pretty insane.
Nah, shout out Geoffroy.
Another idea that Geoffroy touches on frequently is terror, which definitely means the fear of death, but more importantly to him and to the chivalrous French mind, the fear of shame. The whole late medieval Western ethical system that he exists in is built on a single idea, which is that the worth of any deed is measured by how much it costs you to accomplish it. Jousting is good, tournament fighting is a little better because it's more like war. Real war is the best of them all because it actually destroys you. The suffering is what makes
All
it
of
worth
this
anything.
seems like it stems from societal things, though.
Monks finding God through
It's never like
fasting,
themselves telling
so they're
themselves that
constantly
shit.
uncomfortable or in pain. So basically what we've ended up with here is a system where the psychological wounds of war aren't really something to be avoided or even necessarily treated. There's something that you have to earn and then endure, but then you convert them into your identity. At least that's what Geoffroy did. You're not allowed to not be damaged because being damaged is proof that you were there. Also kind of ironic, or maybe actually heroic, depending on how you look at it, that he wrote a book about what it looks like to be destroyed by war and to keep going anyway, and then he died proving that point. There's a reason he's remembered as one of the coldest knights who ever lived. Let's go a little more local.
Shout out Geoffroy,
Medieval
bro.
people witnessed way
Shout
more
out
violence in
Geoffroy.
their day-to-day lives than we do.
I hope I'm
so it's
pronouncing
worth
his name
exploring how
correctly.
that impacted their mental health in a broader communal way. To do that, we have to look at one of the most incredible surviving documents from the late Middle Ages, a canonization inquest from 1363 in Provence, southeastern France. A canonization inquest was basically a papal legal proceeding to determine whether or not someone should be a saint, and in this case, the candidate was a noblewoman named Countess Delphine de Puy-Michel. She had passed away about 3 years before the inquest, and a bunch of people in the local community believed that she had maintained some kind of mystical direct line to God during her life. So 68 witnesses came before the two papal representatives, and they testified about Delphine's miracles and their own experiences. What does any of this have to do with PTSD or moral injury, you ask? Stick with me, I'm leading you on the beautiful, sensual dance of history. The witnesses in the inquest had all survived the Black Death, mercenary invasions, and civil war in a 20-year window between 1343 and 1363. That's a lot to try and process.
The fuck is the fuck is going on here? Can we get an ESPN analysis right quick? We have wait, I'm on the fucking wrong shit. We have a man on his back, knees in the sky, spreading his legs. We have a person, we have a person in a coffin. We have, oh my gosh, so many things are happening here. Oh my God, there's a lot. I hope I'm doing all of this justice to everybody who was curious about what's happening over here. Holy shit, man. God damn, YouTube interface go down for at some point, bro.
Such a short period of time. These people ran the spectrum of medieval society. You have merchants and soldiers and servants and noble lords and local nuns and future cardinals, but they all give a similar description of what Delphine was best at healing. All the stuff that they had gone through in the last few decades had left them with these internal emotional wounds that they couldn't really explain or properly describe, but she was able to somehow make them go away. So these are 14th century people in rural France explicitly articulating that war and violence produce a different kind of wound than physical illness, which means it requires a different kind of healing. Let's just pull an example from the inquests and see what we can see. One of the witnesses is a local lord named Ferrarius of Coucoron. In May of 1358,
It's a
he's
tough
ordered to
name
lead
as
his
well.
troops
God
in an
damn,
attempt to
Ferrarius?
retake the walled town of Coucoron from a mercenary company that's been terrorizing the area. Before the battle, he's all messed up. He visits Delphine and he tells her about the whole situation. What he
So Delphine was basically a kind of therapist before therapist, is what I'm getting.
says is that he's afraid of going into battle, but he's also afraid of not going because retreating would
Was
bring
it
this unbearable
psychiatrist?
shame
I'm
to
pretty
his
sure it's
household.
therapist.
Ferrarius is trapped here. This medieval honor code has kind of forced him into a position where both of the available choices absolutely suck. If he fights, he's probably going to have to kill somebody, which the church understood as a wound to the soul, or he himself could die. Then if he doesn't fight, that's cowardice, which messes with your identity and your social standing. Delphine, of course, tells him not to go, but he tells her he can't follow her advice because, and I quote, he did not dare to follow her warning because he would be shamed and reproached for timidity. So Delphine makes
Like, yeah, bro, like I said, a lot of this shit seems like it's stemming from societal pressure. A lot like now, bro. Is that not fucking crazy? Think about how much self-hate stems from external external things, like other people. How much pressure we feel from other people. Like, oh my gosh, bro. Life is a fucking circle, bro. Life is a fucking circle. We are experiencing the same things that they experienced, just in a different form, but we can now identify them. We can now label them. We can now tackle them better in a sense, but we're still facing the same things.
him a promise,
Crazy.
which is that he won't kill anyone and she'll somehow intercede directly with God on his behalf. She's basically doing her best to try and manage his moral injury before it even happens. Now, miracles happen pretty frequently in the Middle Ages, and I personally believe miracles still happen now, but we're just too distracted and overstimulated to notice them. Everything Delphine told him ended up coming true. Both of his horses went lame.
The fact that you're alive, that's a miracle. That's a miracle. Your ass could have been aborted. Could have been, something else. You could have been kidnapped. You could have been, I don't know, bro. Like, what if somebody's who was kidnapped is watching this video and I'm saying, like, I don't know what I'm saying, but let me be quiet. But the fact that you are here, it's a miracle, and I'm glad you are here. Yes, I am sick. That's why my voice is so thin. Never mind that.
He was forced to leave the battlefield. His men charged ahead without him, right into an ambush, and they get slaughtered. But he escapes unscathed with his honor and his soul still intact. Boom, not bad. When the papal commissioners questioned Ferrarius about this, they asked him directly, if the horses hadn't been injured, would you have ridden with your men? It is kind of a loaded question because he's testifying.
I would have said yes, but at the same time, you're lying. So I would have, you know what I would have said? I would have said we would not be having that question. When it's time for action, it is time for action. That's it. Just gotta give out vague answers, bro. You gotta give out vague answers. Like, if the horses were not injured, we would not be having this conversation. We'd be having a conversation of victory, of you I don't know, you something talking about our soul and blessing us or something of that sort. I would have said if it was time for action, I would have taken action. That's it. That's it right there. But that whoever that priest is, that pope is, that nigga's a hoe. You gotta come from a generation of bitch ass niggas, bro. You got to. How about you loading a question like that?
In front of a bishop and an archbishop.
Yeah,
so
nah.
He wants to look like a good Christian, but he still answers honestly. Yes, he would have ridden. Of course he would have ridden.
He wasn't going to kill.
He wasn't going to kill, dude.
Shout out, bro.
He would have been in that ambush and he would have died right alongside his men. Let's just sit and let this marinate for just a second. This man came before a papal court and admitted publicly that he had been afraid. This chivalrous Catholic warrior had been afraid. He admitted that he had literally needed divine intervention to survive with his honor intact. The inquest basically gave him a structured communal space to tell that story, and in telling it, he was able to process it. It's the same way that Jean de Joinville was able to process his trauma by dictating it all out loud to a scribe 50 years after the fact. This is a civilization that understood at some level what moral injury required for healing. They built something, the inquest, the penance, the community, the saint, that basically functioned as a structured space for doing the work that moral injury requires. Confession, narrative, and public witness, and communal reintegration. But let's put the finishing touches on this medieval masterpiece. I'm not saying that medieval soldiers didn't suffer from PTSD. I mean, they almost certainly did. Even Geoffroy de Charny, in his book on chivalry, mentions that something knights will have to deal with when they come home from war is, I quote, being beset by great terrors. So clearly this was a thing. What I'm really trying to say is that we spent the last 100 years or so treating combat trauma as a strictly medical problem, and the solutions are usually prescriptions or cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but I think what's important for us to understand is that moral wounds are very real and need to be treated as such. I know I say this in every video, and I've already said it in this one, but everyone thinks of the Middle Ages as this brutal and chaotic time where nobody knew anything, but just look at the evidence I've laid out here. Clearly, in some ways, they understood the nuances of mental health better than we do. What do you think? Is there something to this, or do we have a better approach now?
Is there something to this? I guess what we can get from all of this is that we've been fighting the same problems low key throughout history, and the solutions have been getting better and better. Obviously, the one solution I don't like is the over medication. A lot of people are getting addicted to their medication. That's the one thing I don't like. But we have been able to fight these things better. We have been able to deal with them better. Through time, we have become better at recognizing, better at sometimes discussing. I know some people still don't have those type of access to discuss mental health like that in their families or in their environment. But we have gotten better at discussing mental health. We have gotten better at having, services ready to help you and medication ready to help you as well. So there is something there to show you. Like life is a circle, and we've been getting better and better as time goes with dealing with certain problems. That's what I got to say, bro. I don't know. I'm sick. I'm tired. I can still think. I can still think. You'll never take that away from me. Never.
Let me know in the comments. As always, I'm John. This has been Medieval Mindset. And remember,
Hey, shout out this nigga John, man. I didn't think I was gonna be interested or invested, but shout out John. Shout out my nigga. What was his name? Fucking Geoffroy? Geoffroy and Ferrarius. Shout out them, bro. That's some real niggas right there. Shout out John as well. Like, this video was actually entertaining, but this entire video, fucking amazing. Great. Spectacular. Jolly good show, mate. Yo, chill, yo. I'm out. I'm out of here.